What if 80% of your results come from just 20% of your efforts? And yet you spend most of your days pouring energy into the wrong things. This is the trap many people fall into, filling their schedules with endless tasks, yet seeing little real progress. We confuse being busy with being effective, but the truth is that most of our effort contributes very little to the outcomes that truly matter. The good news is that there are a way out. In this video, you'll learn how to identify the small slice of activities that create the biggest impact, and how to double down on them so you can achieve extraordinary results with less effort. This is the essence of the 80-20 rule, also called the Pareto principle, a simple yet powerful observation that a minority of causes almost always produce the majority of results. You'll see how this principle applies to business, productivity, relationships, wealth, and even personal happiness. Along the way, we'll explore core ideas such as focusing on your vital few, eliminating trivial distractions, multiplying your leverage, designing a simpler lifestyle, and rethinking success itself. The author behind this idea is Richard Koch, a former Bain & Company and Boston Consulting Group partner turned entrepreneur. By applying the 80-20 mindset, he invested in and helped build successful companies like Filofax, Plymouth Gin, and Betfair. Over 4 decades, he has averaged around 22% annual investment returns, an extraordinary record. His book, The 80-20 Principle, first published in 1997 and updated in 2017, has sold over 1 million copies and remains one of the most influential business books in the world. To build on the introduction, let's start with the heart of the 80-20 idea. At its core, the principle says that a small minority of inputs create the large majority of results. In other words, most of what we achieve, whether in business, career, or life, comes not from everything we do, but from a narrow band of activities that really matter. The author put it simply, 80% of all our results in business and in life stem from a mere 20% of our efforts. Think about sales in a company. It's common to find that 80% of revenue comes from just 20% of the products. Apple is a classic case. Although it sells many devices and services, most of its profits still flow from the iPhone and a handful of other core products. This shows how a small slice of offerings carries the financial weight of the whole company. If you zoom out, you see the same pattern in wealth distribution. Roughly 80% of the world's wealth is concentrated in the hands of about 20% of people. It may not always land on exactly 80 and 20, but the imbalance remains striking. That is why the 80-20 principle is best understood as a heuristic rather than a rigid law. Sometimes the ratio is 70-30 or even 90-10, but the underlying truth stays the same. Most outcomes come from a disproportionately small set of causes. This flexibility is part of its power. It doesn't matter whether the exact ratio is 75-25 or 95-5. What matters is recognizing that in almost every area, the few dominate the many. The author said that the reason most people fail to benefit from this principle is because they treat all tasks as if they carry the same weight. We fill our days with emails, meetings, errands, and minor projects, and we give them equal attention. But the reality is that only a handful of those activities will make a real difference. If you can identify those few and focus more of your time there, you multiply your results without multiplying your effort. Take personal productivity as an example. Many people spend hours crossing off small to-do items that don't actually move them closer to their goals. They feel busy but remain stuck in place. In contrast, when you focus on the top 20% of actions, those few things that directly create progress, you find yourself making leaps instead of steps. This is why 2 people can both work 8-hour days, yet one makes far more impact than the other. The author thinks the danger lies in our natural tendency to equate effort with value. We assume that if something takes time, it must be important. But the principle shows us that the real measure isn't effort spent, but impact achieved. This mindset shift can feel uncomfortable at first because it challenges our ingrained habits of busyness. Yet once you see the pattern, it becomes hard to ignore. It's also important to remember that the principle scales across domains. In relationships, a few close friends often give us most of our joy and support, while many casual connections add little depth. In learning, a few core concepts usually explain most of the subject, while endless details contribute only marginally. In investing, a small portion of decisions drive the bulk of returns. These examples underline the same truth: the vital few outweigh the trivial many. What makes the 80-20 principle so valuable is not just its accuracy, but its clarity. It gives us a lens to cut through the noise of everyday life and see what truly matters. Once you adopt this perspective, it changes how you approach your work, your time, and your priorities. Instead of spreading yourself thin across everything, you learn to zero in on the few areas that deliver the most. By doing so, you position yourself to achieve extraordinary results without exhausting yourself. Moving from the core principle, the most powerful place to apply 80-20 thinking is in business strategy. The author said that every company, no matter its size or industry, is shaped by the imbalance of inputs and outputs. Some products, customers, and even employees generate far more value than the rest, yet most businesses treat all of them as if they are equal. By learning to see and act on these imbalances, leaders can transform performance without needing endless resources. One of the clearest ways to apply this principle is by segmenting your portfolio. Instead of looking at sales as one big number, break it down by product, customer, or channel. What you'll often find is that a small percentage carries the weight. In many companies, around 20% of the products account for 80% of sales. In fact, the imbalance is often sharper. 5% of clients can deliver 80% of the profit. When leaders identify these disproportionate sources of value, they suddenly see which parts of the business are worth protecting, nurturing, and expanding. The book gave the example of product lines. Many companies fill their catalogs with dozens or even hundreds of offerings, hoping to please every type of customer. But when you analyze the numbers, you often discover that just a handful of those products generate the bulk of profit. The rest, meanwhile, consume resources, marketing, distribution, staff attention, while contributing little. The author thinks this is where businesses go wrong. They spread themselves too thin, maintaining low-value products instead of doubling down on the winners. That is why pruning the tail is so important. To prune the tail means deliberately discontinuing or deprioritizing the products, customers, or activities that don't earn their keep. This may feel counterintuitive, even risky, because it seems like you are shrinking the business. But the evidence shows the opposite. By cutting away the underperforming parts, you free up energy, money, and focus to reinvest in the profitable core. Companies that have the courage to prune often find that their growth accelerates, because they stop wasting effort on what doesn't matter. The same insight applies to staffing. In most organizations, a small group of employees creates most of the real value. These are the high performers who innovate, drive sales, solve tough problems, and motivate teams. The author said that leaders should recognize this pattern instead of treating all employees as interchangeable. That doesn't mean ignoring the majority, but it does mean paying close attention to the stars and creating conditions where they can thrive. Investing in the most productive people yields far more impact than spreading training and rewards evenly across the board. The author has lived this principle through business ventures. With Betfair, an online betting exchange, he saw the opportunity to focus on a disruptive model that would outcompete traditional bookmakers. Rather than spreading efforts across many different ideas, the strategy was to put resources into this one breakthrough. The result was spectacular. Betfair became one of the most successful companies in its field. Similarly, with Plymouth Gin, the focus wasn't on competing in every segment of the spirits market. Instead, the company concentrated on revitalizing a niche, premium product that carried heritage and brand value. By pruning distractions and investing in what mattered most, the business found new life. The tech industry offers another clear demonstration. Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon dominate their fields not because they do everything, but because they focus on a handful of blockbuster products and services. Apple thrives because of the iPhone and related devices. Microsoft profits are anchored in Office and cloud services. Google earns the vast majority of its revenue from search ads. Amazon, Marketplace, and AWS drive the lion's share of results. Each company has side projects, but the wealth comes from a very narrow base. These firms embody the 80-20 mindset at scale. For leaders who want to apply this principle, the framework is straightforward but requires discipline. First, map the data. Break down your sales, profits, and costs in as much detail as possible to see where the disproportion lies. Second, prune ruthlessly. Be willing to exit products, stop serving unprofitable customers, or shut down weak channels. Third, reinvest your freed-up resources into the winners. Put more capital, talent, and marketing muscle behind the products and customers that truly drive growth. This cycle of mapping, pruning, and reinvesting is how the 80-20 principle turns from a nice idea into a strategic engine. It doesn't require more hours, more complexity, or more staff. It requires clarity, courage, and focus. When businesses embrace this way of thinking, they stop being busy for the sake of being busy and start channeling their energy into the few areas that matter most. This is where real breakthroughs are made and where extraordinary performance becomes possible. Building on the business perspective, the 80-20 principle becomes even more powerful when applied to personal productivity. The author said that just as companies generate most of their results from a small share of products, individuals also achieve the majority of their success from a small portion of their daily efforts. The problem is that most people fail to see this imbalance and instead spend their energy scattered across low-value tasks. Think about the difference between writing a focused article in 2 hours versus spending the same amount of time checking emails. The concentrated writing session might generate a finished draft that could reach thousands of readers, while email triage simply clears the inbox for a short time before it fills again. The output is not even close. This contrast illustrates how 20% of effort often carries 80% of the impact, while the other 80% barely moves the needle. The author emphasized this with a memorable line: "Things that matter most must never be at the mercy of things that matter least." In daily life, however, the opposite often happens. People let endless meetings, small favors, or shallow online browsing consume hours, leaving little time for the work that could truly change their lives. The danger lies in mistaking activity for achievement. Practical tools can help shift this balance. One of the most effective is identifying your high-impact 20% of tasks. These are the actions that directly contribute to meaningful progress, such as preparing for a key presentation, developing a skill that enhances your career, or spending uninterrupted time on a creative project. Once you recognize them, it becomes easier to guard those activities and push aside the distractions that compete for attention. Another crucial practice is learning to say no. Many commitments offer very low returns, whether it's an optional meeting, a project with little relevance, or social obligations that drain energy. By declining them, you create space for the tasks that actually matter. The author thinks that every no to a low-value activity is a hidden yes to something far more valuable. Time blocking is also a simple but powerful tool. This means reserving specific hours of the day for deep, uninterrupted work on your most important tasks. Rather than leaving priorities to chance, you structure your schedule around them. Even a single 2-hour block of undisturbed work can often yield more progress than an entire day filled with interruptions. Interestingly, the author also encourages what he calls productive laziness. This doesn't mean being idle. It means focusing on the essential, conserving energy, and eliminating or delegating everything else. By refusing to spread yourself thin, you achieve more by doing less. Instead of hustling endlessly, you work selectively with greater impact. Modern productivity experts have echoed this idea. Tim Ferriss, for example, has openly credited the 80-20 principle as the foundation of his own approach. He designed his lifestyle around the vital few activities that produce disproportionate results, from writing to carefully chosen business ventures, while minimizing or outsourcing the trivial. His success shows how powerful the principle can be when applied to individual choices. When people adopt this mindset, the results can be transformative. You stop glorifying busyness and start prioritizing leverage. You become more protective of your time, more intentional about your commitments, and more confident in letting go of what doesn't matter. The 80-20 principle teaches that the secret to productivity is not working harder, but concentrating on the few actions that deliver the biggest rewards. Moving from personal productivity to money and work, the 80-20 principle continues to reveal striking patterns. The author said that most wealth in society is not spread evenly but instead concentrated in the hands of a relatively small group of people or businesses. This isn't an accident, but the natural outcome of the imbalance that the principle describes. A few investments, ventures, or decisions tend to generate the majority of financial success, while the rest deliver very little. The author thinks the smartest way to use this principle in building wealth is to seek out niches where the potential returns are disproportionately high. Rather than competing in crowded markets where effort leads to small gains, it is wiser to focus on areas where a small but strategic investment of time or money can lead to outsized rewards. This is why niche businesses often outperform broader ones, and why early investors in breakthrough industries can see massive growth compared to those who spread themselves too thin. One of the clearest illustrations is self-employment. When you work for yourself or create something in a specialized area, you often capture the benefits directly instead of sharing them with a large organization. The book points out that people who establish authority in a narrow niche, whether in technology, consulting, or even creative fields, frequently achieve results far beyond what would have been possible in a more general setting. Their expertise becomes rare, their reputation grows quickly, and the financial returns multiply. The author offered practical guidance by listing what he called 27 things that shape financial independence and career leverage. Among them are principles such as specializing in a very small niche, working for yourself or with the mindset of ownership, and building around your unique strengths. The common thread is that wealth flows to those who concentrate on their own vital 20% instead of diluting their energy across countless minor opportunities. This approach doesn't only build financial stability, it also creates more meaningful careers. When people focus deeply on their strengths, they develop mastery, attract better opportunities, and often find greater satisfaction in their work. The 80-20 principle suggests that rather than chasing every possibility, individuals should identify their personal high-impact path, cultivate it with patience, and allow compounding results to take hold. The call to action is clear. If you want to grow wealth or build a rewarding career, stop scattering your attention. Find the 20% of opportunities that align with your strengths, commit to them fully, and develop authority in your chosen field. By applying the principle with intention, you not only increase your chances of financial success but also create a career that feels purposeful and sustainable. After seeing how the principle shapes wealth and career, it becomes clear that the same imbalance appears in everyday life. The author thinks our personal relationships, routines, and sources of joy also follow the 80-20 pattern. A small group of friends or family often brings us the majority of our happiness, while the rest may have little impact or even drain our energy. This means that paying attention to the vital few relationships can transform the quality of our daily life. Consider the idea of friendship. Most people know dozens or even hundreds of acquaintances, but it is usually 2 or 3 close companions who provide deep support and joy. These are the people who show up in difficult times, who share meaningful experiences, and who give us a sense of belonging. By focusing on these few instead of spreading ourselves thin across countless casual connections, we can strengthen the bonds that matter most and feel far more fulfilled. The same principle applies to activities and habits. The author said that a handful of practices consistently generate the greatest sense of well-being. Regular exercise, lifelong learning, and nurturing intimate relationships often create the majority of happiness for most people. On the other hand, many distractions, whether endless scrolling on social media or superficial obligations, add very little to long-term satisfaction. Recognizing which moments truly lift our spirits allows us to design a life with more joy and less noise. One practical way to use this is to run a personal audit of your week. Look back and ask yourself which moments brought the most peace, connection, or energy. It could be a quiet walk, a meaningful dinner with family, or an hour spent reading. Once identified, these are the vital 20% of experiences that deserve to be doubled or even tripled in your schedule. At the same time, commitments that leave you drained can be gently reduced or eliminated. Network effects also play a role in magnifying happiness. When you invest your time in communities or environments where your contributions multiply, the returns are far greater. For example, engaging deeply in a supportive online group or a creative circle can provide not only personal growth, but also a sense of shared momentum. This is far more rewarding than scattering your attention across many shallow interactions that never amount to much. The author thinks the essence of happiness under the 80-20 rule is decluttering. By simplifying commitments, letting go of low-value social obligations, and amplifying the few relationships and activities that truly matter, you can build a life that feels both lighter and richer. The path to more joy is not to add more, but to focus on less, the parts that really count. Building on how the 80-20 principle shapes life and happiness, the next step is to adopt it as a mindset. The author thinks this mindset is not about rigid rules, but about seeing imbalance strategically. Instead of spreading effort evenly across all tasks, the focus shifts to identifying the few actions that truly move the needle. This requires reflection, awareness, and the courage to question conventional practices that waste energy without meaningful results. A key technique is conducting regular impact audits. By reviewing your week or month and pinpointing which activities deliver the greatest results, you can reinforce habits that matter and reduce low-value efforts. Treating time like cash also helps. Invest it where returns are highest and avoid squandering it on tasks with minimal payoff. This approach encourages selective effort and ensures that energy goes into the areas that create exponential impact. Practical examples of this mindset in action include opting out of pointless meetings, automating repetitive tasks, and delegating responsibilities that others can handle more efficiently. The author said that being lazy and thoughtful are two sides of the same coin, highlighting that strategic inaction can free up energy for the vital few. For instance, a professional who limits email checking to 2 focused blocks a day often achieves far more than someone constantly responding to every notification. Consistency is essential. The 80-20 mindset is a habit, not a one-off exercise. It requires ongoing evaluation of priorities and a willingness to prune activities that provide little value. Over time, this disciplined approach amplifies results across work, personal projects, and relationships, making life both more productive and more fulfilling. The ultimate power comes from consciously choosing where to focus and letting go of the rest. Looking back, the 80-20 principle shows that a small number of actions or choices create the majority of results in work, wealth, and life. The author thinks that by identifying the vital few and focusing energy there, anyone can achieve extraordinary outcomes while avoiding wasted effort. Applying this principle means working smarter, not harder, and living with more clarity and purpose. Start by choosing one area, whether at your career, finances, or relationships, and run a quick 80-20 audit this week. Eliminate low-leverage tasks and prioritize what truly moves the needle. When you focus on what truly matters, you unlock the power to achieve far more by doing far less.